If you wish to join me in Acts chapter 5, Acts chapter 5 is where we'll focus our attention for a few minutes tonight. I set my phone right there so I could see the time. Sometimes on second Sundays when we plan for a singing, we have youth events or something like that, and so a lot of our song leaders aren't here, and so usually last minute we'll make a decision to not have singing because of all of our song leaders are gone, and so then, you have to be prepared to fill the time if there's not a lot of song leaders. So I never really know until Sunday morning whether or not it's going to be, like a shorter lesson or a longer lesson. And the dangerous thing about tonight is I can talk for 35 minutes, but I can also talk for 15. So we're going to shoot for the 15, but it may go closer. So I'm going to set my phone there just so I make sure I'm respectful of that as well. But I also think that any moment that we get a chance to approach God's Word, whether 15 minutes or 30 or somewhere in between, it's a chance for us to grow spiritually, and I think that's true in Acts chapter 5. An eye-opening death is the way that I titled it, and I don't guess I've ever really paid as close attention to the account of Ananias and Sapphira as I have over the last couple of weeks. And it was all, brought about by a study of Acts 5 and verse 11, where there was this great fear that came over the church, or a great fear that swept over the multitude of people that were in the presence of Ananias and Sapphira and the events surrounding their death. And I thought about that verse because I was looking into the word fear in the New Testament, but then I started to pay closer attention to the text, and something just clicked in my mind. And I don't want to be morbid when I say this, but I remember the first time that I saw someone die. And I remember like the feelings and the emotions and the shock, really, of that happening, and the sober feeling that swept over my body when that happened. It was just an eerie feeling, but it was so shocking that it caused my eyes to be open to a reality that life just ends. And really at the end of at the end of our lives will be the end of our lives, right? But eventually, I guess, we'll all reach that point where death will become a reality. And it doesn't really matter how often, I guess, it happens in our lives. It's one of those realities that we have a hard time accepting. But regardless of how it happens, whether it's expected or unexpected, whether it was a long life or a short life, death is just shocking. And I don't know that I've ever heard a story as shocking, maybe, as Acts 5, 1 through 11. Just to think about it. I mean, you hear tragic stories, you hear things that are unexpected, things that you would never believe happen. But what happens in Acts chapter 5, 1 through 11 just absolutely blows my mind. And it opens my eyes to some truths that I think you and I can apply tonight in our time together. Here's the story. You have Ananias and Sapphira that come to Peter, at least Ananias does first. He comes to Peter and he starts to lay down some money at the feet of the disciples, just like other people have been doing. At the end of Acts 4, there's a division in our English Bibles, but it's really all one narrative. All of these people, these disciples, these Christians are bringing all kinds of money and treasures to the feet of the disciples so that no needy person, Acts 4 and verse number 33 and 4, they had no needs. Every need that any person had was met because of the generosity of disciples in bringing all the money that they had and all the treasures that they had and anything they had to donate. It could have been tools, it could have been time, it could have been the land that they possessed. I mean, all of these things they were bringing to the disciples so that they could put them to good use. And so it's like Peter stands up maybe when you get to chapter 5 and he's like, is there anybody else that wants to donate? Is there anybody else that feels like they could give to the cause of Christ? And Ananias kind of runs up there and he's like, yeah, man, I had this piece of land. I don't know how much Ananias sold it for, but say he's sold it for $800. And he goes up there to Peter and he says, yes, I've got this piece of land that I sold and here's the money that I gained from it. And Peter lays down $300. Now, everybody in the crowd, they think, wow, man, what a Christian. Ananias, he sold this land for $300. They had just seen Barnabas do it in Acts 4 and verse number 36 and 7. So they're thinking, man, Ananias, man, he's a great Christian, just like Barnabas is, because he had this piece of land. He sells it for $300, brings it and lays it down at Peter's feet and walks away thinking, well, I just did my good Christian deed. I gave this money that I had, knowing that he and his wife had conspired together and they kept 500 of that 800 and put it in their own pockets. Now, again, I don't know how much. I'm just using that as an example. And so Ananias walks away from that exchange, knowing that he has shorted them because he pocketed some of that money. But before he could get too far, notice what Peter does in verse number 3. Peter speaks up because he could sense what was happening, and Peter knew, and he says, "Why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and keep back part of the proceeds of your land? Wasn't it yours while you possessed it, and after it was sold, wasn't it at your disposal? Why is it that you planned this in your heart? You've not lied to the people, but you've lied to God." When he heard these words, Ananias dropped dead, and a great fear came on all those who heard. The young man got up, wrapped his body up, carried him out, buried him, and 3 hours later his wife comes in, not knowing what happened. "Tell me," Peter said, "did you sell the money for this price or sell the land?" Maybe he said, "Did you sell it for $300? And she said, "Oh yeah, we did." And Peter knew instantly that she was lying. Peter said to her, verse 9, "Why did you agree to do this to the Spirit of the Lord? Look, those are the feet of the people that buried your husband at the door, and they're going to do the same for you." Instantly, verse 10, she dropped dead. When the young men came in, they found her dead, carried her out, and buried her beside her husband. Then great fear came on the whole church and all those who heard those things. Now, I read that text, and it's shocking. That day in Jerusalem where the church was just buzzing, all kinds of great things were happening in the church, they had to dig 2 fresh graves out back because of these 2 people and their actions. So my question then is, why did they die? Why did Ananias and Sapphira die? Because it's Sapphira. Ananias and Sapphira. Why did they die? What happened in that moment or in that occasion when they took some money that they had to the disciples to be used to provide needs or meet the needs of people in need? Why did they die in that situation? Here is at least my thoughts. It's easier to answer the question in a negative way. Before we say this is why they died, let me give you 2 things that I believe are the reason why, it didn't happen. I don't think, number one, they died because they told a lie. I don't think it was because they told a lie that they died, at least only because they told a lie. If God instantly and made a routine out of killing people that lied, I don't guess any of us would be here, right? It would be impossible for us to be here if God made a routine habit of killing people that lied. Now, they did do that. Don't get me wrong. They did intentionally deceive all the people. And Peter saw right through it because he said, you didn't just lie to the people, but you lied to God too. So they did lie, but I'm arguing that that isn't the only reason they died, or isn't the foundational reason they died. Neither do I believe that it was because they held back part of the money. And I think that because I want you to know that what happens in Acts 4 and 5, it wasn't required. There wasn't a set amount of money that they had to give in order to meet the needs of the people. There were just Christians in need, and so the disciples were saying, hey, if anyone wants to give, we'll put it to good use. They never said you had to do this. It was completely voluntary. And so as much as Ananias and Sapphira wanted to give, they could have given. But the point wasn't that. The point was that they decided to do something different. So I don't think they died completely because they lied, and I don't think it was because they held back some of the money. You say, why then, Ty? Why do you think that they died? And this has just caused me to stop and think, because I think it hits a little bit closer to home than I would like to admit. It causes me to stop and to think and look in the mirror of my own heart and ask myself, why? Why did this have to happen the way that it did? What caused this situation to happen? If it wasn't because they just told a lie, if that's the case, we'd all be dead if God made a habit out of killing people because they lied. Or number two, because they held back a little bit of the money. Again, it was voluntary. They didn't have to do that. They could have given whatever amount of money they wanted. So I don't think that was it. You say, Ty, what is it then? Why do you think that Ananias and Sapphira died? And I think it goes deeper beyond any of those 2 reasons, and it's that word in red, hypocrisy. I believe that Ananias and Sapphira died because of their hypocrisy. That they walked up to Peter that day and they set that money down on the table with the intention of making everybody believe that it was the complete amount that they had gotten. They were trying to fool the church. They were trying to fool everybody by looking religious and making it seem like they were giving all of this money to the church, knowing good and well that they weren't. And not just were they trying to fool the church, but they were trying to fool God too. They were trying to make this appearance, this big idea that they were actually better than they really were, that they were giving the impression they gave 100% of everything that they had. And by the way, this isn't a text to prove the dangers of not giving 100%. That's not either. The point is this. The point is that they walked up there that day with the intention of giving the impression to everyone in the room, oh, we're such great Christians. We sold our land and we gave all this money to meet the needs of all of these people. And that was a major problem. Hypocrisy is a major problem. It's the number one leading cause, at least according to most polls on Google, why people won't come to church, because Christians are hypocrites. And I know that most of the time people say that, they just are looking for a reason and looking for an excuse, but there's got to be some truth to it if it's a reason often regurgitated. That there's something about the way that people who claim to be Christians live or don't live that makes people think they say one thing and do another. And Ananias and Sapphira are a great case study of this, that they walk up there, make everybody think that they're something they're not. And that was a big deal. It was a big issue and it was a big problem. Hypocrisy always starts on the inside. Most of the time it's manifest on the outside, but no hypocrite that's hypocritical on the outside. He was that way first on the inside. And that was true in Ananias and Sapphira. It came out. That's why it's so dangerous, hypocrisy. It's not easy to spot. It's not easy to find. But Peter could see right through it. And I point those things out to say this. I think that what happens in Acts 5 with Ananias and Sapphira is a warning to the church. I think it's not a warning to the lost. It's not a warning to the outsiders. It's a warning to us, the church, Christians that read this and see what they did and can learn a major lesson about the genuineness of our lives and the genuineness of our faith. That we sometimes do, in reality, do things to impress people or make people think that we're better than we are. And there's just a problem with that. That Ananias and Sapphira, they tried to fool people and they tried to fool God. Maybe the distance between Ananias and Sapphira and myself is not as far as I would like to think. Look at the response, though. It happened in verse 5 when Ananias dropped dead. Great fear came on all those who heard. And again, when Ananias' wife Sapphira was carried out in verse 10, great fear came on the whole congregation or on the church and all those who heard these things. That was the response of all the people, that everyone sort of sat up straight when that happened. When this example of what was right and true, when they come in and all of these people are literally giving all they have to meet the needs of these people. And then Ananias come in and Sapphira and they try to fool everybody and pull the wool over their eyes and they fall down dead. It's like the church immediately just sits up straight. It's kind of like, my grandfather was a principal for years, and I remember him saying something. He was like, you spank one kid and 300 kids will sit up straight, right? You see it happen. When you spank one kid, everybody sort of gets right. They realize, hey, something serious is going on, and that's sort of what's happening in Acts chapter 5. The whole church then begins to pay attention about what's happening. Now, some suggest that what happens in Acts 5 with Ananias and Sapphira is nothing short of a miracle. And one guy says that a miracle is when there is a worthy object to be attained. That's when people did miracles. And if that is true, then I think the worthy object to be attained in Acts chapter 5 and the example of Ananias and Sapphira is the purity and the unity of the church. And God was so serious about the purity and the unity of the church that he was even willing to use the greatest example, maybe even the most extreme example of Ananias and Sapphira, and so much so that it was impressed, dare I even say, tattooed on the souls of the people in that church. It was so extreme. He cared so much about the unity and the purity and the good things that were happening as far as the gospel was advancing that he would use an example so extreme as Ananias and Sapphira to show them about the reality and the genuineness of their faith. Let me give you two lessons, two thoughts that I gained from this passage of Scripture. And by the way, before we look at those two, I want you to look down at Acts 5 and verse 12. There were other signs and wonders being done among the people, not just what happens with Ananias and Sapphira and all the needs that were being met, but there were many signs and wonders being done among the people through the hands of the apostles. They were all together in Solomon's colonnade. No one else dared to join them, but the people spoke well of them. In other words, they had respect for the Christians after what's happening. They're seeing the church function the way that it is, and people respected them for it. Verse 14, believers were added to the Lord in increasing numbers, multitudes of both men and women. Now that leads me to these two thoughts. Not in this particular order, but I put them this way on purpose. I want to focus on the fact that God's discipline, the way that God responded to Ananias and Sapphira in this situation, I would argue is an act of his discipline, that he was teaching a lesson to the church. And when God's discipline works the way that it's intended to work, it yields good fruit. And that's what you see right there in Acts 5, verses 12 through 14. That when God acted, when God's discipline was invoked, when it was put into practice the way that it was intended to be put into practice, when Christians responded to God's discipline the way that it was intended to be, good things happen. Now here's number two. You can't fool God. You can't fool God. You know, sometimes in our lives, that's what we do. And I think that's why it hits so close to home to me. Maybe why I felt like I was closer to Ananias and Sapphira than I would like to admit, because sometimes it just is the case that we try our very hardest to fool God. We try to make it look like we're giving so much. We try to make it look like we've done so much or we've given so much, knowing in reality we've kept a little bit in our pockets. We've not given what we could. Everybody else thinks that we have, and maybe we can fool everybody else, but we can't fool God, so we ought to quit trying. Let Acts 5 serve as an example. I read Acts 5 in verse number 6 when Ananias died, and Acts 5 verses 10 and 11 when great fear came on the whole congregation. If you read Acts 5, 1 through 11 and don't get a little bit scared or worried or challenged or convicted, then maybe we just need to read it over and over again really slowly and listen to the reality of what happens when our faith is anything less than genuine, when we try our very hardest to put on a show and to fool God. Instead, though, let us learn from God's pattern of discipline. At least in this case, it was dropping folks dead. I don't think that's going to happen tonight. I don't, a lot of things have happened while I was preaching. People fall asleep and people pass out and all that. I've never seen anybody pass out dead, but it could, I guess. I don't think that's going to happen. But I do know that God disciplines, that he has a plan for discipline, and when it's done right and when people respect it and use it in the right way, it yields good fruit. It did in Acts chapter 5 when the people realized what God was doing, teaching them a lesson, and they ran with it. People respected them for it. And then they learned a lesson about trying to fool God. That while everyone else may perceive that Ananias and Sapphira were such great givers and great Christians, God wasn't fooled. Maybe tonight what we need to do is think about the genuineness of our faith, the real reason why we do what we do. Do we put a little bit out there and keep the rest in our pockets for ourselves or for our own time? And I guess in some situations we do that without even knowing. Let's commit then to being genuine people. Let's not give the world a reason to say, all those Christians are just hypocritical. Let's say what we mean and mean what we say. Maybe you're not a Christian, you never obeyed the gospel. This evening you can do that. The church was growing by leaps and bounds in Acts 4, Acts 5, and even throughout the rest of the book, because there were real Christians that were living out the call of Jesus Christ in their lives. And it changed them and changed other people. And we can do that tonight too. You can be changed by living out the call of Jesus Christ in your life. And not just change your life, but change others too if you'll respond to the gospel. Or maybe you are a Christian and somewhere along the lines, like Ananias and Sapphira, you put something out there to give the appearance, hey, I'm doing it. I'm a good Christian. I've got everything together, knowing that you've just kept something a little bit in your pocket for yourself. You're holding back a little bit. Give everything you got. Give everything you got to God. Be genuine in your faith. Don't leave anything in the tank. If we can help you tonight in any way,